worried about typos, proofreading, and other grammar mistakes? Do you feel like these kind of writing issues are holding you back from pressing submit or pressing publish on your stories, articles, and even your books? Well, don't be. Hi there, my name is Brian Collins and welcome to the Become a Writer Today channel. Typos and grammar mistakes are things that every writer worries about, and certainly issues in your writing that you may want to fix. But they're not necessarily something that should stop you from achieving your writing goals. In this video, I'm going to describe 5 different famous books that I guarantee you know which were published with embarrassing typo and grammar mistakes, which publishers and writers had to scramble to fix later on. And I'm also going to give you a number of different strategies which will help you press publish or submit with confidence. When I first started writing short stories, I spent months writing and rewriting the same collection of short stories over and over and over and over. I kept line editing my short stories because I wanted to make sure they were free of typo and grammar mistakes. But this was a big mistake, and here's why. The problem with these particular short stories wasn't that I had a misplaced apostrophe or some sort of weird grammar mistake. It was actually that I hadn't learned how to tell a compelling story in the first place. And the only way I would have learned that is if I'd actually taken the rough, ugly draft of my short stories and sent it to a beta reader or an editor for feedback. I made the same mistake when I started writing articles and blog posts online. I spent a lot of time worrying that somebody was going to read one of my blog posts, find a typo in it, and email to complain. But the problem wasn't a typo in a headline or some sort of weird apostrophe issue buried in the middle of my blog post. It was actually finding readers and getting traffic to my blog in the first place. And the best way to do this was actually to start publishing content more frequently so I could figure out what readers want. This is one of the earlier books that I wrote, The Savvy Writer's Guide to Productivity. Well, a fun fact, I actually wrote this book with a different title before 2014. I didn't have much money as an aspiring self-published author back then, and I figured because I was working as a journalist, I could find and fix all of the grammar and typo mistakes myself. So I released the book out into the world, and a few people bought it, which I was delighted with. But then I got a few emails from readers complaining about the typos and mistakes inside of the book. At first I was mortified because I couldn't believe that I'd published something with typo and grammar mistakes. But then later I realized that this was actually valuable information because it was causing the book to get some negative reviews. So I took the book down and I used some of the book royalties that I had earned from this particular book to hire an editor. They immediately fixed all of the typo and grammar mistakes and also highlighted some issues I'd missed. This was a big lesson for me because I realized that my time as a writer is better spent writing books and that an editor will have more professional experience and will just be able to fix issues inside my books faster than I can. And I was able to re-release the book with a new title and completely overhaul it, and then I was able to earn more book royalties as a result, and I was also able to publish a product, because yes, books are products, that I was more proud to stand by. Because here's the great thing about writing today, whether it's writing a blog post or a short story or even self-publishing a book. If there's a grammar or typo mistake that you somehow overlooked or somehow missed, it's pretty easy to fire up WordPress or to open back up your book editing app, fix the grammar mistake and republish or resubmit a new copy. Now, I'm not advocating that you should go ahead and publish something that's full of typo and grammar mistakes, but what I'm saying is that sometimes mistakes will naturally seep into published work and that you can find and fix these issues later on. To be honest, it happens with really successful titles too. I'm going to give you 4 different examples of popular published works that were released with typos and grammar mistakes only to be fixed. You can't deny that Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is one of the best-selling books of all time. Well, did you know in the very first edition of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, there's a list of school supplies for Hogwarts. And this list of school supplies says the word one wand twice. And it was only in later subsequent editions that this list was fixed and amended. Didn't stop J.K. Rowling finding success with her book. This is one of the most famous dictionaries of all time. It's a dictionary that many writers keep at their desk. It's Webster's New World Dictionary, and new editions are released of this almost every year. So in the 1934 edition, one of the most famous typos of all time appeared. D-O-R-D. Let me show you what this means. So the person who's compiling this dictionary meant to say capital D or small d is equivalent to density. But instead, an error was made and D-O-R-D means density went into the dictionary. And people started using this word thinking that they meant the same thing. And it was only something that was fixed much later on and long after D-O-R-D had gone into use by people who took what was inside of the dictionary as gospel. So if the dictionary compilers and authors can get it wrong, then sometimes it's probably okay for writers today to get it wrong too, because you can just go and fix things later. Cormac McCarthy is one of my favourite authors. He really has a great way with the written word and with his prose. And of course he's hugely successful, so there's a whole team of editors and proofreaders who help him with his books. The Road is of course one of his most well-known titles, and it's certainly a title that I recommend you check out. It also is a title that wasn't immune from typos. The first edition of this book described a moment of panic when the protagonist saw him walking along the bench down shore. And of course, Cormac McCarthy had meant to actually say the beach. And again, this was something that was fixed later on. Another famous example that I love of a typo which completely changed the context is from the Wicked Bible of 1631. So the 10 Commandments are featured in this Bible, but there was a huge mistake. So you may be familiar with one of the 10 Commandments which reads, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." Well, this edition skipped the word not and instead read, "Thou shalt commit adultery." So completely changing the context. Jonathan Franzen is another one of my favourite authors. He's written books like Freedom and The Corrections. He's also somebody who pulls no punches. When he's writing one of his books, he disconnects his computer from the internet, and he described in an interview how he went so far as supergluing the Ethernet port in his computer so he wouldn't be able to get distracted while working on his novel. He basically says you can't get any serious work done if you're at a writing station that's connected to the computer. Whether that's true or not, who knows, but it's certainly true for Jonathan Franzen. Anyway, about 10 or 11 years ago, his book Freedom was released in the UK. And it made headlines in The Guardian and other British newspapers when 8,000 copies of Freedom were recalled due to hundreds of typesetting errors. The Guardian described how the hundreds of typesetting errors in what was called, back then dubbed, the book of the century. I always think it's hilarious when we talk about books of the century so early into this century, contain hundreds of mistakes in spelling, grammar and characterization. And the entire book, or 8,000 copies of this book, had to be recalled. Probably was a pretty expensive recall for that publisher. Thankfully today, if you're a self-published author, you can just simply open up your file, fix those typo and grammar mistakes, and then republish back on Kindle. And because it's print on demand, you won't have to pulp lots of titles that have all of those issues and mistakes inside of them. So if you finish the first draft of your book or your article, there's a couple of things that you can do to prevent typo and grammar mistakes slipping in. I recommend that you print your work out if it's a longer piece, or perhaps you could simply export a PDF to your tablet, and that way you can read through and mark it up on a different device. Because when you're writing in front of your computer, you're more naturally inclined to overlook typos and grammar mistakes because you've been staring at the same screen for hours. In other words, you're not going to be able to see the wood from the trees. You can even go so far as changing the font size and line spacing. That's a trick I use all the time, and it's a trick that I learned when I was working as a sub-editor, fixing in typos and grammar mistakes for a national newspaper in Ireland. I'm also an advocate for using a grammar checker. So the grammar checkers that I use include Grammarly. I use these all the time to find and fix grammar and typo mistakes in articles that I write, articles that I edit by other writers for the sites that I run, and even for book chapters. As great as grammar checkers are, they're not a replacement for working with a human proofreader or a human editor. So if you're working on a book, I recommend that you use a service like Readsy to find an editor for your book. I've used them in the past to find editors for multiple books that I've written and self-published, and it was something that helped me take what was a relatively rough draft and get it into a state that was ready for publication a lot quicker and easier than if I tried to do it myself. Of course, you may not be writing a book, perhaps you're writing an article or an essay, in which case you could use a service like Paper to get something edited quickly and easily. This is a service that I've used for various freelance writing and editing jobs that I worked on in the past, and I was happy with the results. Or you could go ahead and hire a proofreader or an editor on a service like Upwork or the Pro Blogger Jobs Board. And this is great if you have a series of articles that you need edited, or if you have a series of blog posts that you want checked, and so on. What I'd say to you is, as a writer, your time is often better spent hitting the target word count, or shaping the overall structure and tone of your manuscript, or telling stories, or building relationships with readers, than it is trying to find and fix every grammar mistake inside of your book. As you can see from the examples I featured a few moments ago, lots of successful works have been released only for people to spot typos and other issues in them, and then for publishers or the people behind them to go and fix them after the fact. So if you're a scrappy new author and you're self-publishing or you're starting your blog, by all means do all that you can to get it ready for publication. But don't work on it so long that you actually delay pressing submit or publish, because what you really need is feedback from real world readers, from an editor, and also to get more of your content and more of your writing out into the world so you can start earning more of an income that you can use to invest in your writing and use services like the ones that I featured on screen a few moments ago. So I hope you enjoyed the content in this video all about the truth behind grammar and proofreading. In summary, check out the tools that I've mentioned, like Grammarly. If it's a longer piece of work, consider hiring an editor or proofreader, and then get back to what you're best at, which is writing and publishing.